Hello and welcome to Working on Written Expression Episode 1. Today we will be exploring the issue of scope, an area of written expression that you don't come across very much at school, and by the end of today's episode you will become more concise with your written expression and more purposeful with your writing. To start with, however, let's understand what scope actually is. So scope refers to the extent of the area or subject matter that something deals with or to which it is relevant. Now, on that point of relevance, you might be asking, well, how is this relevant to us? How is this relevant to writing? Now, you see, words and sentences also have a scope of meaning. When we are talking about scope in relation to a sentence, we're really asking two questions. What is this sentence about? And what is it trying to say? Now, why do we care about optimizing the scope of our writing? Now, probably for these reasons. Have you ever been told that your writing sounds repetitive? Have you ever been told that you're not making your point clearly? Do you ever feel like you're going around and around in circles? And if you have been told these things or asked these questions, you probably have an issue with scope. And the goal for us today is to try and make our points in the fewest possible words without needless verbosity, without words that add extra padding to our writing. We want to avoid those. Now, you still might not get it. I don't get it. I need an example. Well, let's have a look at an abstract example first, and then we'll apply it to something more useful. So, let's have a look here at the top of the page. The cow ate the grass covers the cow eating the grass. If I was then to say that the cow ate the grass was eaten by a cow, I'd be saying the same thing needlessly. In an essay about who ate what, these two sentences are redundant because they cover the same scope. A lot of words are wasted by rewriting the same thing, and as you can see across those two red bits earlier at the start of this passage, the two statements are really saying the same thing. Now, that's not quite how it shows up in our essays, and that's not quite how it shows up in our assessments at school, but it's something sneakily similar. So what we'll find, instead of obviously repeating yourself like the above example, instead of that, students tend to do the equivalent of something like this. The cow ate the grass. The grass that was eaten by the cow was watered that morning. The grass eaten by the cow was therefore soggy and damp when it was eaten. And you can see that the end of each sentence is being then used as the beginning of the next one, essentially. We're repeating the same base of the sentence, the fact that the cow ate the grass, which is the foundation of each sentence, needlessly repeating the same thing, something which has already been covered, and we're wasting words to describe something that is absolutely not new. And at this point, if anyone is still not entirely clear on what we mean, let's have a look at more examples. Let's look at examples that will help us apply this idea of scope to our own writing. The idea of scope is, and any good teacher will tell you this, is beneficial for structuring your paragraphs or for short answer responses. And often in these areas of assessment, you'll be looking for multiple techniques and multiple examples which all have the same effect. Now, something that all of us Uplift English tutors believe is that we should do our best to combine the entirety of the technique, example, and effect continuum into a single sentence. Now, that's a rule of thumb. If we can do it in a manner that allows us to stay concise, then we'll do it. But if it takes us too many words to make our point, then we might split our ideas across multiple sentences. But either way, let's try to do it here at the bottom of the page, and let's see if we can combine it into one place. And I think we've got an example that does that. Let's have a look. The metaphor of slip into more confident versions of themselves upon returning to their home country positions responders to appreciate the attachment that Vicky's parents have to Vietnam. Now, let's assume that this was any old hypothetical text, but what we've done is a few good things here. You'll note that we've got a technique, a metaphor. You'll note that we have a quote, slip into more confident versions of themselves upon returning to their home country. And you'll note that we've got an effect. And critically, the effect talks about the impact on the reader, how the reader is positioned. So let's read it again. The metaphor of slip into... we'll start again. The metaphor of slip into more confident versions of themselves upon returning to their home country positions responders to appreciate the attachment that Vicky's parents have to Vietnam. Now imagine if you can replicate a sentence like this 3 or 4 times across your paragraph. You'll have a fairly analytically dense piece of writing, which would be great. And you'll be talking a lot about how the reader's positioning changes throughout the text and how our understanding morphs as we move through the literature. But what about this? What if we have more than one technique from one example, or more than one example for a particular effect? Now you see, instead of having individual sentences, we can combine all the relevant techniques under one example and all the relevant examples under one effect. And here's an example that'll make it a little bit easier for you. We've got a topic sentence and a little bit of analysis after that, but remember, the paragraph's not quite finished yet. Initially in the feature article, and again it might be a hypothetical feature article, initially in the feature article, the writer feels disconnected from Japan. There is the repetition of intensifiers and negatively connoted language in too tall, too loud, and too clumsy. This high modality is emphasized by the hyperbole, used in conjunction with simile, when she exclaims that embarrassment is like death, but worse. These language techniques combine to represent a sense of disconnection from Japanese culture and an inability to assimilate. Now look at what we've done here. In sentence 1, we offered our topic sentence, an idea that talked about being disconnected. In the second sentence, we brought in 3 technique words: repetition, intensifiers, and negative connotations with a quote: too tall, too loud, too clumsy. In the sentence following, we had another technique, high modality, another technique, hyperbole, another technique, simile. And then we had a quotation: embarrassment is like death, but worse. And then we rounded off with an explanation. These language techniques combine to represent a sense of disconnection from Japanese culture and an inability to assimilate. Now, as you can see, we fit 6 techniques and 2 quotes into 67 words simply because they were combined under one another when they pointed towards the same thing. A number of techniques are relevant to each quote, so they come together and both quotes create the same effect. And so that's saved until the end. Their scope, in other words, has been optimized. Instead of repeating the same effect multiple times and recounting, because that's sometimes what happens, we said, well, we've got multiple techniques and they all point towards the same conclusion. And if we've managed to do that in 67 words, then now what we'll be able to do is bring in a lot more understanding of the writer's context. We'll be able to talk a lot more about things like genre. We'll be allowed to talk more about how the reader is positioned in other ways, or simply we'll be able to move forward with our analysis and make new points. And if we manage to incorporate 6 techniques and 2 quotes into such a short word count, then imagine what we can do if we had a much larger word count. So, episode 1 today has focused on the importance of scope, and it's focused on the need for a single sentence to make a single point so that we can move on in the next sentence to a new point. And this will come when we try our best to make sure that every sentence that we write is adding something new and is contributing to the previous one in a way that evolves our ideas and takes our points forward.